I have always loved the rain. Growing up in Seattle, I learned to find comfort in the constant drizzle, the way the water would bead on evergreen needles, the smell of wet earth and cedar. But after what happened to me on Highway 20 in the winter of 1993, I cannot stand the sound of rain hitting a car windshield. Even now, more than 3 decades later, that particular sound sends me right back to that night, trapped in a vehicle with a man whose face still appears in my nightmares. My name is Gabriel, and I work night shifts. I've done so for most of my adult life. Back then, I was employed at a lumber mill outside of Concrete, Washington, a tiny town nestled deep in the North Cascades. The work was brutal. The hours were worse, but the pay was decent enough for a 24-year-old trying to save money for college. My shift ended at 2 in the morning, and I would make the hour-long drive back to my apartment in Burlington, winding through mountain roads that were rarely traveled at that hour. On the night everything changed, my truck broke down. I should have known something was wrong. The engine had been making a strange rattling sound for weeks, but I kept putting off taking it to a mechanic. Money was tight, and I convinced myself it could wait. It could not wait. Halfway through my drive home, on a particularly desolate stretch of Highway 20, the engine seized up completely. Smoke poured from under the hood, and I barely managed to pull onto the shoulder before the truck died entirely. I sat there for a moment, watching the rain hammer against the windshield, and tried to figure out my options. This was 1993, before cell phones were common. I had no way to call for help. The nearest town was at least 10 miles behind me. I could see nothing but darkness and trees in every direction. The only light came from my truck's headlights, which were rapidly dimming as the battery drained. I decided to walk. I grabbed my jacket, locked the truck, and started back down the highway toward Concrete. The rain was coming down harder now, a typical Pacific Northwest winter storm. Within minutes, I was soaked through, my boots squelched with every step. The forest pressed in on both sides of the road, massive Douglas firs and cedars forming walls of absolute darkness. The only sound was the rain and my own breathing. I had been walking for maybe 20 minutes when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was another vehicle approaching, but as I got closer, I realized it was coming from inside the trees, maybe 50 yards off the road. It looked like a cabin or some kind of structure. I hesitated. Growing up in Washington, you learn quickly that there are places in the woods where you are not welcome, where people go to be left alone, where asking for help might be more dangerous than continuing to walk. But the rain was getting worse, and I was freezing. I decided to take the chance. I pushed through the undergrowth, branches scraping at my face and jacket. The cabin came into view, a small, ramshackle structure that looked like it had been built decades ago and barely maintained since. A single light glowed in the window. I could see a figure inside, silhouetted against the light, standing perfectly still. Something about the way the person was standing made me uneasy. They were not moving at all, just facing the window, as if they had been watching me approach. I almost turned back. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to return to the road and keep walking. But then the figure moved, and I heard the door creak open. A man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall, maybe in his 50s, with long, graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, typical Pacific Northwest attire. His face was weathered, lined with deep creases, and his eyes were pale blue, almost colorless in the dim light. "Car trouble?" he asked. His voice was rough, like he had not spoken to another person in a long time. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Truck died about a mile back. I'm trying to make it to Concrete." He studied me for a long moment, and I felt incredibly exposed standing there in the rain. Finally, he nodded. "I can give you a ride. I was heading that way anyway." Something in his tone made me doubt that last part, but I was cold, wet, and exhausted. I accepted. His vehicle was parked behind the cabin, a dark blue van with no windows in the back. The kind of van that makes you think twice. But I climbed into the passenger seat anyway, telling myself I was being paranoid. He started the engine and pulled onto the highway without another word. For the first few miles, we drove in silence. I stared out the window, watching the rain-slicked trees blur past, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease in my gut. The van smelled strange, a mixture of cigarette smoke and something chemical, like cleaning supplies or paint thinner. The man kept both hands on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Then he started talking. "You work at the mill?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Night shift." "Hard work," he said. "I used to do something similar, back before everything changed." "Changed how?" I asked, not really caring but feeling like I should make conversation. "Before I had to leave," he said. "Before they started looking for me." My blood ran cold. I glanced at him, trying to gauge if he was joking, but his expression had not changed. He was still staring straight ahead, his face blank. "Looking for you?" I asked carefully. "They do not understand," he continued, as if I had not spoken. "None of them do. But they will. Eventually they all see it my way." I wanted to ask him to stop the van. I wanted to demand he let me out. But we were in the middle of nowhere, traveling at 50 miles per hour on a dark, rain-soaked highway. If I jumped out, I would be injured at best. And something told me that if I showed fear, if I let him know I was scared, things would get worse. "Where exactly are you headed?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Same place as you," he said. "Concrete. Got some business there." The way he said business made my skin crawl. I noticed for the first time that there were scratches on the inside of the passenger door, deep gouges in the metal, as if someone had clawed at it desperately. I looked down and saw dark stains on the floor mat beneath my feet. My heart was pounding now, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You can just drop me at the edge of town," I said. "I can walk from there." "No trouble," he said. "I will take you wherever you need to go." That was when I saw the gun. It was tucked between the driver's seat and the center console, partially hidden, but visible enough that I knew he wanted me to see it. My mouth went dry. I glanced at the door handle, calculating my chances. We were still going too fast. The rain was too heavy. I would not survive the fall. Then I remembered something. A news report I had seen a few weeks earlier about a man wanted in connection with several disappearances across Washington state. The police sketch had shown a man in his 50s with long hair. They said he had been approaching people on rural highways, offering rides, and that several individuals had vanished after being seen getting into a van matching his description. At the time, I had dismissed it as something that happened to other people, in other places. Not to me, not here. But looking at the man beside me now, I realized with absolute certainty that I was sitting next to that man. I was in his van, and whatever he had planned for his other victims, he was planning for me. "I know who you are," I said quietly. It was a stupid thing to say, but the words came out before I could stop them. He turned to look at me then, really look at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I can only describe as excitement. He smiled, a slow, spreading smile that revealed yellowed teeth. "Good," he said. "That makes things easier." He reached for the gun, and I did not think. I grabbed the steering wheel and jerked it hard to the right. The van swerved violently, tires screaming on the wet pavement. He tried to fight me for control, but the vehicle was already hydroplaning. We spun once, twice, and then the van left the road entirely. We crashed through the underbrush, branches exploding against the windshield. The van slammed into something solid, probably a tree, and the impact threw me forward. My head cracked against the dashboard, and for a moment, everything went white. When I came to, the van was stopped. The engine was still running. The man was slumped over the steering wheel, blood running down his face from a gash on his forehead. I did not wait to see if he was conscious. I kicked open the passenger door and ran. I ran through the forest, incomplete. Darkness, rain pouring down, branches tearing at my face and arms. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, and then I collapsed behind a massive cedar tree and waited. I do not know how long I stayed there. It felt like hours. I kept expecting to hear him crashing through the undergrowth behind me, to feel his hand on my shoulder. But he never came. Eventually, the rain slowed and I heard voices. Lights appeared through the trees. Someone had seen the crash site and called the police. When the officers found me, I was incoherent, babbling about the van and the man and the gun. They wrapped me in blankets and took me to the hospital. Later, they told me they had found the van, but the driver was gone. There were bloodstains on the steering wheel and the driver's seat, but no sign of the man himself. They searched the surrounding forest for days, brought in dogs and helicopters, but he had vanished. They confirmed my suspicions, though. The van matched the description from the wanted bulletins. They found evidence inside, items belonging to missing persons, photographs, maps with locations marked, but they never found him. Despite the manhunt, despite the resources poured into the search, he simply disappeared into the Pacific Northwest wilderness. I moved away from Washington State 6 months later. I could not stay. Every time I drove past a dark blue van, every time I saw someone who vaguely resembled him, my heart would start racing, and I would have to pull over until the panic attack passed. I live in California now, far from the rain and the trees and the endless darkness of the North Cascades. But I still think about him. I still wonder if he is out there, somewhere in those woods, waiting. I wonder how many others he picked up before me, and how many after. I wonder if he is still offering rides to stranded travelers on dark, rain-soaked highways. And I wonder if anyone else has been lucky enough to escape. The police still have an open case file. They still occasionally call me with updates. Though there has not been any real news in years, they assure me that they are still looking, that they have not given up. But I know the truth. The Pacific Northwest is vast, and there are places where a person can disappear and never be found. Places where the forest protects its secrets. I have not driven on Highway 20 since that night, and I never will again. Olympic National Park is one of the most beautiful places on Earth. Nearly 1 million acres of pristine wilderness, ancient rainforests, rugged coastline, and mountains that seem to touch the sky. People travel from all over the world to hike its trails, to stand beneath trees that have been growing since before this country was founded, to experience the raw, untamed beauty of the Pacific Northwest. But what many visitors do not understand is that this beauty comes with danger. The park is vast, unforgiving, and every year, people vanish into its depths without a trace. Riley was one of those people. It was October 2015, and our group of 6 had planned this hiking trip for months. We were all friends from college, scattered across different cities now, and this was supposed to be our reunion trip. A long weekend in the Olympics, hiking the Hoh River Trail deep into the rainforest, camping under the canopy, reconnecting with each other and with nature. Riley had been the most excited about it. She had moved to Portland after graduation and had fallen in love with the Pacific Northwest. She talked constantly about the hiking, the forests, the way the light filtered through the trees. This trip was her idea. We started early on a Friday morning, driving up from Seattle in 2 cars. The weather forecast was good, unusually clear for October. We reached the trailhead around noon, shouldered our packs, and headed into the forest. The Hoh Rainforest is unlike anywhere else I have ever been. Everything is green, impossibly green, draped in moss and ferns. The trees are massive, some of them over 200 feet tall, their branches forming a cathedral-like canopy overhead. It feels ancient, primordial, like stepping back in time to when the world was young and wild. Riley was in her element. She kept stopping to take photographs, framing shots of the moss-covered maples, the sword ferns, the way the filtered sunlight created pools of gold on the forest floor. She had brought her expensive camera, the one she had saved for months to buy, and she was determined to capture everything. We teased her about slowing us down, but it was good-natured. We were in no rush. We had 3 days and only planned to hike about 15 miles total. By late afternoon, we had covered about 6 miles and decided to make camp near the river. We found a clearing, set up our tents, and spent the evening cooking dinner over a portable stove and telling stories. Riley was quiet that night, more withdrawn than usual. When I asked her if everything was okay, she smiled and said she was fine, just tired from the hike. I believed her. I had no reason not to. The next morning, we broke camp and continued deeper into the forest. The trail became narrower, less maintained. We saw fewer people. By midday, we had not encountered another hiker for hours. We stopped for lunch beside the river, where the water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. Riley wandered a short distance upstream with her camera, looking for a better vantage point. We could see her through the trees, maybe 30 or 40 yards away, crouched beside the water. Someone suggested we should get moving again. We packed up our lunch supplies and called out to Riley that we were ready to go. She waved back, signaling she had heard us. We watched her stand up, adjust her camera strap, and then turn away from the river. She walked into the trees, heading back in our direction. Except she never made it back. We waited for maybe 5 minutes, assuming she had stopped to photograph something. Then 10 minutes, then 15. Finally, concerned, we walked upstream to where we had last seen her. We called her name. There was no response. We spread out, searching the immediate area, calling louder now. Nothing. The forest had swallowed her. I cannot adequately describe the feeling that came over us in that moment. It was not panic. Not yet. It was confusion, a sense that something was fundamentally wrong, but we could not quite process what. Riley had been right there. We had seen her. She had been walking toward us. How could she simply be gone? We searched for an hour on our own, expanding our radius, shouting her name until our voices were hoarse. The forest gave nothing back. Just silence and the sound of the river and the wind moving through the branches high above. Finally, we accepted that this was beyond what we could handle alone. 2 members of our group hiked back to the trailhead to get help, while the rest of us stayed and continued searching. The park rangers arrived within 2 hours. By evening, a full search and rescue operation was underway. Teams with dogs, helicopters with infrared cameras, dozens of volunteers combing the forest. They searched through the night and through the next day and the day after that. They searched for a week straight, covering miles in every direction from where Riley had last been seen. They found her backpack on the 3rd day. It was about a quarter mile from the river, off the trail, placed carefully at the base of a large Sitka spruce. Not dropped or abandoned, but placed as if she had set it down gently and walked away. Her camera was still inside, undamaged. When the rangers reviewed the photographs, they found dozens of pictures of the forest, the river, our group. The last photo she had taken was a self-portrait, Riley smiling at the camera with the rainforest behind her. The timestamp showed it was taken just minutes before she disappeared, but Riley herself was nowhere to be found. The search continued for 2 weeks. The Park Service brought in additional resources, expanded the search area, checked every trail, every river crossing, every possible route she might have taken. They interviewed us repeatedly, asking the same questions over and over. What was her state of mind? Had she seemed depressed, suicidal? Was there any chance she had planned to disappear? We answered honestly. No, nothing like that. Riley had been happy, excited, looking forward to the future. There was no reason for her to walk away from her life. They found nothing else. No clothing, no signs of struggle, no indication of where she had gone or what had happened. It was as if the forest had simply opened up and consumed her, leaving only her backpack and camera behind. The search was eventually called off. The rangers explained that they had done everything possible, covered every reasonable area, followed every lead. Olympic National Park is nearly 1,000 square miles of wilderness. Much of it is inaccessible, steep ravines and dense undergrowth where a person could be 10 feet away and completely invisible. If Riley had become disoriented and wandered off trail, she could be anywhere. and if she had been injured, unable to call for help, the chances of finding her decreased with each passing day. They encouraged us to hold out hope. Sometimes missing hikers turned up months or even years later, alive, having survived through luck and determination. But they were gentle about it, and I could see in their eyes that they did not really believe it. They had seen this before. The Pacific Northwest takes people, and it does not always give them back. Riley's family came up from California. Her mother, father, and younger brother. I will never forget the look on her mother's face when we met them at the search headquarters. She was hollow, empty, like part of her had already died. She hugged each of us and asked us to tell her everything, every detail about Riley's last days. We told her about the hike, the photographs, how happy Riley had seemed. We told her we were sorry, so sorry, that we should have been watching more carefully, that we should have gone with her when she walked upstream. Her mother shook her head. "This is not your fault," she said quietly. "Riley loved the wilderness. She knew the risks. This is what she chose." But I could hear the question beneath her words. The question we were all asking ourselves. How does someone vanish in broad daylight, 30 yards from their friends, on a well-traveled trail in a national park? The official explanation is that Riley became disoriented and wandered off trail. Perhaps she went further than she intended while looking for a good photograph. Perhaps she slipped and fell into a ravine or into the river and was swept downstream. Perhaps she encountered a wild animal, a bear or a cougar, though there was no evidence of an attack. Perhaps she suffered a medical emergency, a stroke or seizure, and was unable to call for help. All of these explanations are possible, but none of them feel right. I have returned to Olympic National Park 3 times since Riley disappeared. I do not know why. Maybe I'm hoping to find some clue everyone else missed, some sign of what happened to her. Maybe I am hoping the forest will give me answers. Each time, I hike the same trail, stop at the same spot beside the river where we last saw her. I stand there and try to imagine what she saw, where she went, what happened in those final moments. The forest tells me nothing. Riley's case remains open. She is listed on the National Park Service's missing persons database, along with hundreds of others who have vanished in parks across the country. Every few months, I check to see if there have been any updates. There never are. Her family has never stopped looking. They return to Washington every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, distribute flyers, organize search parties with volunteers. They have offered a reward for any information. Nothing has come of it. Riley's brother told me once that the not knowing is the worst part. If they found a body, at least they would have closure, could lay her to rest, could begin to heal. But with nothing, they are left in limbo, unable to grieve properly because somewhere in the back of their minds is the faint, impossible hope that maybe she is still out there, still alive. I do not share that hope. I wish I did, but I do not. I was there. I saw how quickly she disappeared. I saw the massive scope of the search effort. And I know that if Riley could have been found, she would have been. The Pacific Northwest wilderness is beautiful, but it is not kind. It is vast and ancient and indifferent to human life. Every year, it takes people, swallows them whole, and keeps them forever. Riley is one of its now, part of the forest, part of the mountains, part of the rain and the rivers, and the endless green. I do not hike much anymore. My friends and I, the ones who were there that day, we have drifted apart. We tried to stay in touch at first, but every conversation inevitably turned to Riley, to what happened, to the guilt and confusion we all felt. It was easier to let the friendships fade than to keep reliving that day over and over. Sometimes, I dream about her. In my dreams, I'm back in the forest, and I see Riley walking away from the river. I call out to her, but she does not turn around. She just keeps walking, deeper into the trees until the shadows swallow her, and she is gone. I always wake up with tears on my face. Riley deserved better than this. She deserved to come home. But the forest decided otherwise, and the forest always wins. The fishing industry built the Pacific Northwest. For generations, families along the Oregon coast depended on the salmon runs, the canneries, the boats that went out into the cold Pacific waters and came back loaded with their catch. My family was one of those families. My grandfather fished. My father fished. My uncle Caleb worked at the cannery in Astoria, managing the processing lines and keeping the operation running smoothly. It was hard work, dangerous work, but it was honest. Or at least we thought it was honest. Caleb disappeared in September 1987. He was 42 years old, married to my Aunt Dorothy for 17 years, father to 2 daughters. He was known around town as a fair man, someone who treated his workers well, who could be counted on to help a neighbor in need. He sang in the church choir on Sundays. He coached Little League baseball. He was, by all accounts, a good man, living a quiet life in a small coastal town. And then one morning, he did not show up for work. At first, no one was particularly worried. Caleb had never missed a day in 15 years, but people get sick, cars break down, things happen. His supervisor at the cannery called the house around 7 in the morning. Dorothy answered and said Caleb had left for work at his usual time, 5:30, just like always. He had kissed her goodbye, told her he would be home for dinner, and walked out the door. That was the last time anyone who loved him saw him alive. By noon, when Caleb still had not appeared and was not answering the radio on his truck, people started making calls. Dorothy drove to the cannery herself, thinking maybe he had been in an accident on the way to work. The route from their house to the docks was only about 4 miles, mostly along the waterfront. Someone would have seen something, but there was no sign of his truck, no reports of an accident, nothing. The police were called around 2 in the afternoon. They took a report, asked the standard questions, and told Dorothy that most missing adults turn up within 24 hours. They suggested Caleb might have needed to clear his head, might have driven somewhere to think. Dorothy told them that was not like Caleb, that something was wrong, that he would never just leave without telling anyone. The police nodded and said they would look into it. They found Caleb's boat the next morning. It was drifting about 3 miles offshore, engine off, radio silent. The Coast Guard towed it back to port, and that is when everything became much worse. Caleb was on the boat. He was slumped over the steering wheel, cold and stiff. The medical examiner later ruled the cause of death as drowning, but there were inconsistencies that never made sense. Caleb had a head wound, a deep gash above his right temple that could have been from hitting his head during a fall, or could have been from something else. His boat had a full tank of gas, but the engine had been turned off. There were signs of a struggle, scratches on the deck, a broken railing, but the police said that could have happened if Caleb had lost his balance and tried to catch himself. The official determination was accidental death. The theory was that Caleb had gone out on his boat that morning instead of going directly to work, possibly to check on something related to the cannery's fishing operations. He had slipped, hit his head, fallen overboard, and drowned. He had somehow managed to pull himself back onto the boat before succumbing to his injuries. It was tragic, they said, but these things happened. Commercial fishing was dangerous. The ocean was unforgiving, but none of us believed it. Not for a second. Caleb was an experienced seaman. He had been on boats since he was a child. He knew the water, knew the dangers, knew how to handle himself. The idea that he would go out alone in the early morning without telling anyone, without radiating his position, without following any of the safety protocols he had drilled into every fisherman who worked under him, was absurd. And the head wound, the broken railing, the signs of struggle, all of it pointed to something the police did not want to investigate. Dorothy hired a private investigator 6 months after Caleb's death. His name was Marcus, a retired cop from Portland who specialized in cold cases. He spent 3 months in Astoria talking to everyone who had known Caleb, reviewing the police reports, examining the boat, asking questions the local police had never bothered to ask. What he found terrified us. Caleb had been looking into irregularities at the cannery. For months before his death, he had been noticing discrepancies in the catch reports, fish coming in that were not being properly documented, payments being made to boats that did not seem to match the amount of fish they were bringing in. He had started keeping his own records, a notebook where he tracked everything he saw. He had mentioned his concerns to Dorothy a few times, said he thought something illegal might be happening, but he wanted to be sure before he went to anyone official. That notebook was never found. Marcus discovered that the cannery had ties to organized crime, specifically to a network that was using fishing operations to smuggle drugs up the coast from Mexico. The fish were legitimate, but hidden among the catch, packed in ice and loaded into trucks bound for Seattle and Portland, were kilos of cocaine. It was a smart operation, difficult to detect, and incredibly profitable. The cannery owners were taking a cut. Certain boat captains were taking a cut, and everyone involved had a strong incentive to keep quiet. Caleb, with his meticulous record-keeping and his honest nature, had become a problem. Marcus believed, and I believe, that Caleb was killed. Someone lured him out onto that boat, or forced him, and made sure he would never be able to report what he had discovered. The head wound was not from a fall. It was from being struck, probably with something heavy, probably by someone who knew that Caleb would fight back. They dumped him overboard, left him to drown, and then brought the boat back within range of shore so it would be found quickly. They wanted it to look like an accident. And because the local police were either incompetent or complicit, the investigation went exactly the way the killers wanted it to go. Marcus compiled a report, 40 pages of evidence and testimony, and presented it to the Oregon State Police. They reviewed it, conducted their own follow-up investigation, and found enough irregularities to warrant a deeper look. But by then, 2 years had passed since Caleb's death. The cannery had changed ownership. Several of the key players Marcus had identified had moved away or disappeared. The evidence trail had gone cold. The case was reclassified as suspicious, but no charges were ever filed. No one was ever arrested. Caleb's death remains officially unsolved. Dorothy never recovered from losing him. She stayed in Astoria for a few more years, but the town that had once felt like home became a place of ghosts and suspicion. She did not know who to trust anymore. The neighbors, who had been friends for decades, were they involved? The police officers who came to the house to offer condolences, were they part of the cover-up? The men who worked alongside Caleb at the cannery, did they know what was going to happen? She moved to Eugene in 1992, took the girls with her, and tried to build a new life away from the coast. I was 15 when Caleb died, old enough to understand what had happened, old enough to be angry. I spent years obsessing over his case, reading everything Marcus had written, trying to piece together who had killed my uncle and why they had gotten away with it. I considered becoming a police officer myself. Thought maybe I could reopen the investigation, find the evidence that had been missed. But the more I learned about how the system worked, the more I realized that justice was not always possible. Sometimes the people with power protect each other. Sometimes the truth gets buried because it is inconvenient. I left Oregon when I was 23. I moved to Montana, as far from the coast as I could get, and tried to build a life that had nothing to do with fishing or canneries or the ocean. I work in construction now, building houses, creating things instead of watching them fall apart. But I think about Caleb constantly. I think about the last morning of his life, walking out of his house in the dark, climbing into his truck, and driving toward the docks. Did he know what was waiting for him? Did he suspect? Or did he trust the wrong person? Believe that he was safe, right up until the moment someone struck him from behind. I think about Dorothy too, and my cousins, and how their lives were shattered by my uncle's murder. Because that is what it was. No matter what the official records say, it was murder, and the people responsible have never faced consequences. The cannery, where Caleb worked, closed in 2003. The fishing industry had been in decline for years. Regulations had gotten stricter, and the drug smuggling operation, if Marcus was right, had moved on to other routes and other methods. The building still stands, a rusted shell on the Astoria waterfront, windows broken, walls covered in graffiti. Sometimes when I visit Oregon, I drive past it, and I think about all the men who worked there, who depended on it for their livelihoods, who turned a blind eye to what was happening because they needed the paycheck. I do not blame them, not really. Life on the Oregon coast was hard in the 80s. Jobs were scarce. Families were struggling. If keeping your mouth shut meant you could feed your kids, a lot of people would make that choice. But someone crossed a line. Someone decided that Caleb was too much of a risk, and they killed him for it. Every few years, I call the Oregon State Police and ask if there have been any updates on Caleb's case. The answer is always the same. No new evidence, no new leads. The case remains open, but inactive. They tell me that if anything changes, they will contact the family immediately. I thank them and hang up, knowing that nothing will ever change. Cold cases go cold for a reason. Evidence disappears. Witnesses die or move away or forget. The people responsible grow old and die, taking their secrets with them. And families like mine are left with nothing but questions and anger and grief that never quite heals. I have a daughter now. She's 8 years old, and she has never met her great-uncle Caleb. She does not know the story of how he died, not yet. Someday, I will tell her, when she's old enough to understand. I will tell her about the good man who tried to do the right thing, and how sometimes doing the right thing gets you killed. I will tell her about corruption and cover-ups, and how justice is not always served. And I will tell her to be careful, to always watch her back, because the world is full of people who will hurt you to protect their secrets. Caleb deserved better. His family deserved better. But the Pacific Northwest, with its gray skies and cold waters and small towns where everyone knows everyone, kept its secrets. And Caleb became one of them. The case is still open. If anyone has information about what happened to Caleb in September 1987, the Oregon State Police would still like to hear from you. But I am not holding my breath. 38 years have passed, and the truth is buried as deep as my uncle's body should have been. Instead, he is in a cemetery in Astoria overlooking the ocean that killed him. Or maybe it was not the ocean at all. Maybe it was just greed and violence, and the knowledge that some lives are worth less than others when money is on the line. That is the real horror of this story. Not that Caleb died, but that no one was ever held accountable, and that somewhere out there, the people responsible are still living their lives, free and unpunished. That is the cold case no one wants to solve. There are parts of the Pacific Northwest where human presence feels like an intrusion. Places where the trees grow so thick that sunlight barely reaches the forest floor, where the silence is so complete that your own heartbeat becomes deafening, where you can walk for days and never encounter another soul. These are the places where the wilderness is still truly wild, where nature operates according to its own ancient rules, indifferent to the concerns of the humans who occasionally pass through. Lily worked in one of those places. She was a forest ranger for the Mount Rainier National Park Service, assigned to the remote backcountry areas that most visitors never saw. She had been doing the job for 8 years when she disappeared in the summer of 2012, and by all accounts she loved every minute of it. Lily was not like the rangers who preferred visitor centers and maintained trails. She was happiest when she was deep in the wilderness, alone except for the wildlife, patrolling areas that some of her colleagues refused to enter. I worked with Lily. We were both based out of the Sunrise Ranger Station on the northeast side of Mount Rainier, and we shared patrol duties in the backcountry. I considered her a friend, though Lily was not the type to let many people get close to her. She was private, self-contained, comfortable with solitude, in a way that most people could never understand. She told me once that she felt more at home in the forest than she ever had in any city or town. The trouble started in early June 2012. Lily was conducting a routine patrol along one of the more remote sections of the Wonderland Trail, a 93-mile loop that circles Mount Rainier. She was checking campsites, making sure hikers were following leave no trace principles, documenting wildlife activity, standard ranger work. But on the third day of her patrol, she radioed back to the station with a report that none of us knew quite how to interpret. She had found a campsite, or rather what remained of one. It was about 2 miles off the main trail, hidden in a dense grove of old-growth cedars. The site had clearly been occupied recently, within the last few days based on the condition of the fire pit. But whoever had been there had left in a hurry, abandoning their tent and most of their supplies. What disturbed Lily, what made her voice tight and strained over the radio, was what else she had found. There were symbols carved into the trees surrounding the campsite, not the typical graffiti you sometimes see in parks, initials or crude drawings. These were elaborate geometric patterns carved deep into the bark, some of them covering entire sections of trunk. Lily described them as ritualistic, though she admitted she did not know enough about any particular religion or belief system to identify what they might represent. She took photographs and GPS coordinates and said she was going to search the immediate area more thoroughly before continuing her patrol. When Lily returned to the station 4 days later, she submitted a formal report and turned over her photographs. We all looked at them. The symbols were disturbing, not because they were obviously threatening, but because they seemed so deliberate, so carefully executed. Someone had spent hours, maybe days, carving them, and the campsite itself raised more questions than answers. The tent was expensive, high-end equipment. The abandoned supplies included food, a sleeping bag, camping stove, everything you would need for an extended backcountry trip. But there were no identification markers, no permits, nothing to indicate who had been there. The Park Service sent a team to investigate. They collected the abandoned equipment, took additional photographs, checked missing persons reports to see if anyone matching a possible profile had been reported. Nothing came of it. No one claimed the gear. No one reported a missing hiker who matched the time frame. The symbols were sent to various experts, anthropologists and religious scholars, and the consensus was that they did not match any known ritualistic practices. They appeared to be invented, created by someone for their own purposes. The incident might have ended there, written off as strange, but ultimately explainable. Except Lily kept finding more sites. Over the next 6 weeks, she discovered 4 additional campsites in remote sections of the park, each one similar to the first. Abandoned equipment, ritualistic symbols carved into trees, evidence that whoever had been there had left suddenly. The sites were spread across a wide area, some of them more than 20 miles apart, but they all shared the same characteristics. And in each case, Lily was the one who found them. It was as if whoever was creating these sites wanted her specifically to discover them. Lily became obsessed. She started spending extra time in the backcountry, extending her patrols, searching areas that were not technically part of her assignment. She requested permission to bring in additional resources, maybe dogs trained to track human scent, maybe a helicopter to do aerial surveys. The Park Service denied the requests. Without evidence of a crime, without a missing person or a victim, there was no justification for the expense. They told Lily to document what she found and move on. But she could not move on. She told me during one of our shifts together that she believed someone was living in the park illegally, someone who was disturbed, possibly dangerous. She thought the symbols were meant as warnings or markers, territorial boundaries for areas this person considered their own. She worried that if she did not find whoever was responsible, someone else might stumble into one of these sites, might encounter this person, and something terrible would happen. I told her she was overthinking it. I suggested that maybe it was multiple people, unrelated incidents, just a coincidence that she kept finding them. She shook her head. "It is the same person," she said. "I know it is. and they know I am looking for them. In late July, Lily received the first message. It was left at her ranger station, pinned to the door with a hunting knife. The note was handwritten on a scrap of paper torn from a notebook. It said simply, "Stop looking." That should have been the end of it. That should have been when Lily went to the authorities, when the Park Service took the threat seriously and pulled her from backcountry duty. But Lily did not report the note. She told me about it, swore me to secrecy, and said she was getting close to finding whoever was responsible. She said she could not let them intimidate her, could not let them think they had power over her. She was going to solve this mystery, with or without official support. The second message came a week later. This one was left at a campsite Lily had been using during an extended patrol. She woke up one morning to find another note, placed carefully on top of her backpack while she slept. Final warning. I did not learn about this second note until after Lily disappeared. She had documented it in a private journal she kept, but she never told anyone at the time. I think by then she was scared, but she was also convinced that she was close to finding answers. She thought if she backed down, if she stopped searching, whoever was out there would disappear forever and potentially hurt someone else. On August 15th, 2012, Lily left for what was supposed to be a 5-day patrol in the Carbon River area on the northwest side of Mount Rainier. It was a region she knew well, heavily forested and remote. She radioed in on the first and second days, giving routine updates on her location and what she was seeing. On the third day, her morning check-in was brief and unusual. She said she had found something significant, and she needed to investigate further. She would provide a full report when she returned to the station. That was the last communication anyone ever received from Lily. When she did not check in on the fourth day, we initiated search protocols. A team was dispatched to her last known location. They found her campsite, tent still standing, equipment in place, but no sign of Lily. Her radio was there. Her backpack was there. Even her ranger badge was there, laid carefully on top of her sleeping bag as if she had removed it intentionally. The search expanded. Over the next 2 weeks, more than 100 people combed the Carbon River area. Search and rescue teams, volunteers, other rangers, everyone who could be spared joined the effort. We searched every trail, every clearing, every possible route Lily might have taken. We found nothing. No tracks, no evidence of where she had gone, no indication of what had happened. But we did find one more carved symbol. It was on a massive cedar tree about half a mile from Lily's campsite, freshly cut, the sap still sticky. This one was different from the others. It was larger, more elaborate, and included what looked like a human figure in the center, arms outstretched, surrounded by the same geometric patterns Lily had been documenting for months. Beneath the carving, someone had written a message in the bark. She found me. The FBI became involved. The case was classified as a suspected abduction, possibly murder. They brought in profilers, analysts, forensic teams. They interviewed everyone who had known Lily, everyone who had worked with her, anyone who might have had access to information about her patrol routes. They examined the photographs she had taken of the symbols, analyzed the notes she had been receiving, tried to identify patterns or connections. They found nothing. No suspects, no witnesses, no physical evidence that could lead them to whoever had been leaving those symbols, whoever had been threatening Lily, whoever had taken her. The official investigation remained active for 6 months before it was downgraded to a cold case. The Park Service changed its protocols. Rangers are no longer allowed to patrol alone in remote areas. All campsites discovered off designated trails are now reported immediately to law enforcement, and the sections of Mount Rainier National Park where Lily made her discoveries are now monitored more closely, though no additional symbols have been found since her disappearance. Lily's family has never stopped searching for answers. Her sister comes to Washington every year, hikes sections of the park, posts flyers, talks to anyone who will listen. She believes Lily is still alive somewhere, being held against her will. I do not share that belief. I think Lily found exactly what she was looking for, and it cost her everything. I left the Park Service in 2014. I could not continue working in a place where my friend had vanished, where every patrol reminded me that someone dangerous had been operating in those forests, possibly still is. I moved to Seattle, took a job that keeps me indoors, away from the wilderness. But I think about Lily constantly. I think about those symbols carved into the trees, about the messages she received, about that final carving that said she found me. Who was she? What was he doing out there? And what did he do to Lily? The case remains unsolved. If anyone has information about Lily's disappearance in August 2012, the FBI and the National Park Service are still accepting tips, but I am not hopeful. The Pacific Northwest wilderness is vast and unforgiving. It keeps its secrets well, and somewhere in those forests, I believe, someone is still carving symbols into trees. Still living in the shadows, still waiting for the next person who gets too close to the truth. Lily was that person, and she paid the price for her curiosity and her courage. The summer I turned 16 was supposed to be the best summer of my life. School was out, I had my driver's license, and my best friend Wyatt and I had the entire Pacific Northwest to explore. We lived in a small town in northern Washington, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where the biggest employer was the lumber mill, and where teenagers had two options for entertainment: drive around aimlessly or venture into the endless maze of logging roads that crisscrossed the surrounding forest. We chose the logging roads. Almost every day that summer, Wyatt and I would pile into my beat-up Toyota pickup truck, pack some sandwiches and sodas, and disappear into the woods for hours. We would explore abandoned logging camps, swim in hidden lakes, climb rock formations that probably had names we would never know. It was freedom in its purest form, the kind of freedom that only exists when you are young and stupid and convinced that nothing bad can ever happen to you. We were wrong about that last part. It was late July, maybe the third week of the month, though the exact date has become blurred in my memory over the years. What I remember clearly is the heat. It had been unusually hot that summer, temperatures in the 90s for days on end, the kind of heat that made the forest smell like pine resin and sun-baked earth. Wyatt and I had been driving for about an hour, following a series of increasingly rough logging roads deeper into the national forest land north of our town. These roads were not maintained. The logging companies had cut them decades earlier, used them to haul out timber, and then abandoned them when the trees were gone. Nature was slowly reclaiming them, but they were still passable if you had a truck with decent clearance and did not mind scraping the undercarriage on rocks and roots. We had been on this particular road before, or thought we had. Everything looked the same after a while. Trees, dirt, more trees. We rounded a curve and Wyatt suddenly told me to stop. I hit the brakes, sending up a cloud of dust, and asked him what was wrong. He was staring out the passenger window into the trees, his face pale. He pointed and said, "Do you see that?" I looked where he was pointing. At first, I did not see anything unusual, just forest, thick underbrush, dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. Then my eyes adjusted and I saw what had caught Wyatt's attention. There was disturbed earth about 20 feet off the road, a patch of ground where the natural vegetation had been torn away, and the dirt was darker, fresher than the surrounding soil. We both knew what we were looking at. We had both seen enough crime shows, heard enough local legends about bodies dumped in the forest. But there is a difference between knowing something intellectually and confronting it in reality. I think we both wanted to believe it was something innocent. Maybe someone had been digging for something, looking for a place to plant a tree, burying trash, anything except what we feared it might be. "We should check it out," Wyatt said quietly. His voice had none of its usual energy. He sounded scared, and Wyatt was not the type to get scared easily. "Maybe we should just keep driving," I said. "It is probably nothing." But we both knew we were not going to keep driving. Curiosity is a powerful thing, especially when you're 16 and everything feels like an adventure. We climbed out of the truck and walked slowly toward the disturbed ground. The forest was quiet except for the sound of our footsteps on dry pine needles. No birds singing, no wind, just silence. As we got closer, the smell hit us. It was faint but unmistakable, the sweet, rotten smell of decomposition. My stomach turned and I stopped walking. Wyatt kept going, got within a few feet of the disturbed earth, and then stopped too. He stood there for a long moment, just staring, and then he turned around and his face was completely white. "We need to leave," he said. "Right now." "What did you see?" I asked, though I was not sure I wanted to know the answer. "Just get in the truck," he said. His voice was shaking. "We need to get out of here." We ran back to the truck. I do not think I have ever moved that fast in my life. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. When the engine finally started, I threw the truck into reverse and backed up as fast as I dared until I found a wide enough spot to turn around. Then we drove, faster than was safe on those rough roads, branches scraping the sides of the truck, rocks pinging off the undercarriage. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 minutes. Finally, I asked Wyatt again what he had seen. He was quiet for a long time, and when he finally answered, his voice was barely above a whisper. "It was a grave," he said. "Someone tried to bury something and did not dig deep enough. I could see fabric sticking out, and there was a hand." I nearly drove off the road. "A hand? Like a human hand?" He nodded. He was crying now, tears running down his face. And I realized I was crying too. We were just kids. We were not equipped to handle this. We should have been worrying about summer jobs, and which girls we liked, and whether we would make the baseball team next year. Instead, we had just found a body in the woods. When we finally made it back to the main highway, I pulled over, and we both sat there trying to calm down. We needed to decide what to do. The obvious answer was to call the police, report what we had found, let them handle it. But Wyatt was scared. He kept saying that if we reported it, we would become involved in whatever had happened. There would be questions, investigations, maybe we would even become suspects. His uncle had been wrongly accused of a crime years before, spent months dealing with police harassment before he was cleared. Wyatt did not want to go. Through anything like that, we argued for over an hour. I said we had a moral obligation to report it. Someone had been killed, buried in the woods like trash, and their family deserved to know what happened. Wyatt said we should think about ourselves, about our own futures, about how getting involved in a murder investigation could ruin our lives. In the end, fear won. We decided not to report it directly, but to make an anonymous tip, give the police enough information to find the site without revealing who we were. We drove to a gas station with a payphone, one of the old models where you could still make calls without being easily traced. I made the call while Wyatt waited in the truck. I told the dispatcher that I had been hiking, not driving, near a specific logging road in the national forest. Gave them directions to the area where we had found the disturbed ground. I said I thought I had seen something that looked like a grave, that they should send someone to investigate. Then I hung up before they could ask my name. We waited for news. It took 2 days before the story hit the local paper. Remains had been found in the national forest, the article said. A female victim, identity not yet confirmed, but believed to have been missing from Seattle for several weeks. The investigation was ongoing. Anyone with information was urged to contact the sheriff's department. Over the following weeks, more details emerged. The victim was a woman in her 30s who had last been seen leaving a bar in Seattle with an unidentified man. Her car had been found abandoned near a trailhead about 10 miles from where Wyatt and I had discovered the grave. The police had been searching for her, but had focused on more accessible areas. It was only the anonymous tip that led them to the remote logging road where her body had been hidden. The guilt ate at me. If we had reported it immediately, if we had given the police our names and agreed to show them exactly where we had found the body, maybe the investigation would have moved faster. Maybe they would have found evidence we had missed, evidence that could have led them to the killer sooner. Instead, we had waited, made an anonymous call, and possibly allowed crucial evidence to be lost. The killer was eventually caught, but not for another 3 years. His name was released, but I will not repeat it here. He was a long-haul truck driver who had been picking up women along Interstate 5, murdering them and dumping their bodies in remote locations throughout Washington and Oregon. The woman Wyatt and I found was one of 7 confirmed victims, possibly more that were never discovered. He was caught after he made a mistake, left DNA evidence at a crime scene, and the databases finally matched him to multiple murders. He is in prison now, serving life without parole. The families of his victims finally have closure, or as much closure as is possible when your loved one has been murdered. But I still carry the guilt of that summer day. I wonder if we had acted differently, if we had been braver. Could we have helped catch him sooner? Could we have prevented other deaths? Wyatt and I never talked about it again. We drifted apart after that summer, stopped hanging out, stopped calling each other. I think we both needed to distance ourselves from what we had found, from the memory of that smell and that disturbed earth, and the knowledge that we had been within feet of a murdered woman's body. The friendship could not survive that shared trauma. I moved away from Washington when I was 18, went to college in California, built a life far from the logging roads and dense forests of my childhood. I have never gone back. Even now, decades later, I cannot drive through forested areas without thinking about what might be hidden just off the road, buried in shallow graves, waiting to be discovered. The Pacific Northwest is beautiful, but it is also vast and remote. There are thousands of miles of abandoned logging roads, places where someone could hide a body and it might never be found. How many more are out there? How many families are still waiting for answers about missing loved ones, not knowing that they are lying in unmarked graves in the middle of nowhere? I read statistics sometimes about missing persons cases, about how many people disappear each year and are never found. The numbers are staggering, and I think about that logging road, about how easily Wyatt and I could have driven past without noticing, about how many times we probably did drive past other sites, where we just did not happen to look in the right direction at the right moment. The forest keeps its secrets, and sometimes those secrets are the darkest kind of horror, not supernatural, not imaginary, but human cruelty and violence, hidden among the trees where most people will never find them. I found one, and it changed everything. I wish I could go back and do things differently. I wish I had been braver, stronger, better. But I was just a kid, scared and overwhelmed, and making bad decisions. That woman deserved better. Her family deserved better. And I will carry that knowledge with me for the rest of my life. My sister Eleanor was always searching for something. Even when we were kids, she had this restless energy, a sense that the world we lived in was not quite right, that there had to be something more meaningful out there. Our parents thought it was just a phase, the kind of idealistic thinking that most teenagers grow out of, but Eleanor never grew out of it. If anything, it got stronger as she got older. When she was 23, in the spring of 1997, Eleanor told our family she was moving to Oregon. She had found a community, she said, a group of people who shared her values, who were trying to live in harmony with nature and each other, who rejected the materialism and emptiness of modern American life. It was a spiritual community, she explained, not religious in the traditional sense, but focused on personal growth, meditation, sustainable living, and connection to the earth. Our parents were not happy about it. They asked the obvious questions. Where exactly was this place? Who ran it? How was it funded? What were the living conditions? Eleanor was vague about most of the details. It was near the Cascade Mountains, she said, on private land, away from cities and distractions. The community was led by a man she called Brother Michael, though she admitted that was probably not his real name. Everyone there used spiritual names, she explained, to shed their old identities and embrace their new selves. As for money, members contributed what they could, and the community was mostly self-sufficient through farming and crafts they sold at local markets. It sounded like a cult to me. I told Eleanor as much, and we had a huge fight about it. She accused me of being close-minded, of being trapped in the same consumerist mindset that was destroying the planet. I told her she was naive, that these kinds of groups always turned out to be dangerous, that she was throwing her life away. Neither of us backed down. 2 weeks later, Eleanor packed her belongings into her old Honda Civic and drove to Oregon. That was the last time I saw her in person. For the first year, everything seemed fine. Eleanor would call home every few weeks, always sounding happy and energized. She talked about the work she was doing, gardening and building structures, about the meditation practices that were helping her find peace, about the deep friendships she was forming with other community members. Our parents were still worried, but they were somewhat reassured by the regular contact. At least Eleanor was alive and healthy and seemed genuinely content. She sent letters too, long handwritten pages describing her new life. The community had about 30 members, she wrote, ranging in age from early 20s to late 60s. They lived in a combination of small cabins and communal buildings on about 40 acres of forested land. They grew most of their own food, raised chickens and goats, and supplemented their diet with wild mushrooms and plants they foraged from the surrounding forest. They had electricity from solar panels and a generator, and they got their water from a well. It was hard work, she admitted, but it was fulfilling in a way her previous life had never been. Brother Michael, according to Eleanor's letters, was a wise and compassionate leader. He had studied with spiritual teachers all over the world, she said, and he had developed a unique philosophy that blended elements of Buddhism, Native American spirituality, and environmental activism. He was helping Eleanor understand her place in the universe, helping her heal from traumas she had not even known she was carrying. Our mother read those letters and said quietly that it sounded like Eleanor was being brainwashed. Our father said we should trust Eleanor's judgment, that she was an adult capable of making her own choices. Then, about 14 months after Eleanor had moved to Oregon, the letters stopped. The phone calls stopped too. We waited a week, thinking maybe she had just been busy. Then 2 weeks. Then a month. Finally, our parents called the local sheriff's department in the county where Eleanor had said the community was located. They explained the situation and asked for a welfare check. The sheriff's deputy who went out to the property called our parents back a few days later. He had spoken with several members of the community, including Brother Michael. They had all been cooperative and friendly, he said. They told him that Eleanor had left the community about 2 months earlier. According to them, she had decided the lifestyle was not for her, after all, had packed up her things, and had driven away. They assumed she had gone back to Washington. They seemed surprised that our family had not heard from her. The deputy asked if Eleanor had taken her car, her belongings, her identification. Brother Michael said yes, everything. The deputy asked if there had been any conflicts or problems before she left. Brother Michael said no, Eleanor had simply made a choice, and they respected it. The community did not force anyone to stay, he explained. People were free to come and go as they pleased. Our parents immediately drove to Oregon. They went to the commune themselves, demanded to see where Eleanor had been living, demanded to speak to everyone who had known her. Brother Michael allowed it, though he reminded them that they were on private property and could be asked to leave at any time. Our parents searched Eleanor's former cabin and found nothing. No personal belongings, no clothing, no indication that she had ever been there. It had been completely cleaned out. They spoke with other community members, and everyone told the same story. Eleanor had decided to leave. She had seemed sad about it, but determined. She had said goodbye to a few people, packed her car, and driven away one morning in late August. No one knew where she was going. She had not left a forwarding address or phone number. Our parents filed a missing persons report. The police investigated, but without evidence of foul play, there was little they could do. Eleanor was an adult. She had the right to disappear if she wanted to. Her car was eventually found abandoned at a rest stop along Interstate 5 near Eugene, about 3 hours north of the commune. The keys were in the ignition. Her purse was on the passenger seat, though her wallet was missing. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, nothing to indicate violence. The police interviewed the commune members again. The stories remained consistent. Eleanor had left voluntarily. No one knew what had happened to her after she drove away. Brother Michael expressed his hope that Eleanor was safe and had found whatever she was looking for. He declined to answer any further questions without a lawyer present. The investigation stalled. Months passed, then years. The police followed up on occasional tips, possible sightings of Eleanor in other states, reports of women matching her description, but nothing ever panned out. The commune eventually disbanded sometime around 2002. The property was sold, the members scattered to other parts of the country. We tried to track down some of them, to ask them privately what they knew, but most refused to talk to us. The few who did simply repeated the same story. Eleanor left voluntarily. That was all they knew. I have spent the last 28 years trying to figure out what happened to my sister. I have hired private investigators. I have researched Brother Michael, whose real name turned out to be Michael Brennan, a former insurance salesman from California with no criminal record, but a history of starting and abandoning various spiritual projects. I have driven to Oregon dozens of times, walked the land where the commune used to be, talked to people in nearby towns who might have remembered something. I have found nothing. No evidence of what happened to Eleanor. No proof that she was harmed, but also no proof that she simply chose to vanish and start a new life somewhere else. Her bank account was never accessed after she disappeared. Her social security number has never been used. She has never renewed her driver's license, never applied for credit, never appeared in any database that might indicate she is alive somewhere. The most likely explanation, according to the police, is that Eleanor met with foul play after leaving the commune. Maybe she picked up the wrong hitchhiker. Maybe she stopped to help someone and was attacked. Maybe she had a medical emergency and her body ended up somewhere it has not been found yet. The Pacific Northwest is vast, they reminded us. People disappear all the time, but I do not believe that explanation. I believe something happened at that commune. Something the members were covering up. I believe Eleanor either tried to leave and was prevented, or she discovered something about Brother Michael or the community that made her a threat, and she was killed to keep her quiet. I believe her car was driven to that rest stop and abandoned deliberately to make it look like she had made it away safely. I have no proof, just a gut feeling, the kind of certainty that comes from knowing someone your entire life and knowing when the story does not make sense. Eleanor would have called us. If she was alive, if she had simply decided to start over somewhere new, she would have at least let us know she was okay. She was not the kind of person to let her family suffer like this, wondering and worrying for decades. Eleanor's case is still officially open. She's listed in the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Her photograph, now outdated by nearly 3 decades, is still on file with law enforcement agencies. Every year on her birthday, our family releases new appeals for information, shares her story on social media, begs anyone who might know something to come forward. No one ever does. I'm 54 years old now. Our parents are both gone, our mother passing away in 2015 and our father in 2019. Both of them died not knowing what happened to their daughter. That ignorance ate away at them for years, destroyed their peace, turned them into shadows of who they had been. I have my own family now, kids who never met their Aunt Eleanor, who only know her as the woman in the old photographs, the woman who disappeared into the Oregon wilderness and was never seen again. I still hope that someday I will get answers. I still check my email compulsively. hoping for a message from someone who was at that commune, someone whose conscience finally got the better of them, someone willing to tell the truth about what really happened. But with each passing year, that hope fades a little more. The Pacific Northwest took my sister, and I will never know why. I was not supposed to be out that night. It was a Wednesday in October 2005, cold and drizzling, the kind of Portland evening where the smart thing to do is stay inside with a hot drink and a good book. But I had been at a bar with some coworkers celebrating someone's promotion, and I had stayed longer than I should have. By the time I left, it was past midnight, and the streets were mostly empty. I was walking toward the parking garage where I had left my car when I heard the voices. They were coming from the Burnside Bridge, one of Portland's many bridges spanning the Willamette River. The bridge was maybe 100 yards away, and at first I could not make out what was being said, just the sound of two people arguing, their voices carrying through the quiet night air. I should have kept walking. I should have minded my own business. But something about the tone made me pause. One voice was angry, aggressive. The other sounded scared. I walked closer, staying in the shadows, trying to see what was happening. The bridge was lit by street lamps, casting orange pools of light across the pedestrian walkway. I could see two figures near the railing, maybe halfway across the span. Two men. One was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothing. The other was shorter, thinner, and he seemed to be backing away, his hands raised in a placating gesture. I pulled out my phone, ready to call 911 if things escalated. I had been drinking, not a lot, but enough that I was not thinking as clearly as I should have been. I remember thinking I should announce my presence, let them know someone was watching. Maybe that would de-escalate the situation. But before I could do anything, the larger man lunged forward and shoved the smaller man hard in the chest. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion, though it must have only taken a few seconds. The smaller man stumbled backward, hit the railing, and flipped over it. I heard him scream, a sound that cut through the night and that I can still hear sometimes when I close my eyes. Then he was gone, fallen into the dark water 40 feet below. I ran toward the bridge, already dialing 911 with shaking hands. The larger man was still standing at the railing, looking down into the water. When he heard me approaching, he turned, and for just a moment our eyes met. His face was in shadow, but I could see enough. White male, maybe late 30s or early 40s, with a beard and a baseball cap. Then he ran, sprinting toward the far side of the bridge and disappearing into the night before I could get close enough to stop him or get a better look. I reached the railing and looked down. The Willamette River was black and moving fast, swollen from recent rains. I could not see anything, no sign of the man who had fallen. The dispatcher was asking me questions, trying to get my location, asking if I was sure about what I had seen. I told her yes. I was sure a man had just been pushed off the Burnside Bridge, and I needed help now. The police arrived within minutes. Fire department rescue boats were launched to search the river. I was taken aside by officers who asked me to describe everything I had witnessed. I told them about the argument, about the two men, about the push, about the larger man fleeing. I described him as best I could, though I admitted the lighting had been poor, and I had been at least 50 yards away when it happened. I also admitted I had been drinking, though I insisted I was not drunk, that I knew what I had seen. They asked if I could identify the man who fell. I said no. I had not seen his face clearly. They asked if I had heard what they were arguing about. I said no. I had been too far away to make out the words. They asked how certain I was that there had been two people on the bridge. I said completely certain. There were two men. One pushed the other. I saw it happen. The search for the body continued through the night and into the next day. I went home around 4 in the morning, once the police had taken my full statement and told me they would be in touch. I could not sleep. I kept seeing that moment, the push, the man going over the railing, the scream. I kept thinking about how if I had acted sooner, If I had shouted or run toward them right away, maybe I could have prevented it. Maybe the larger man would have been startled and backed off. Maybe the smaller man would still be alive. 3 days later, they found a body downstream caught in debris near the Ross Island Bridge. It was identified as Andrew, a 31-year-old man from southeast Portland. He had been reported missing by his girlfriend the morning after I witnessed him fall from the bridge. According to the news reports, Andrew worked in IT for a local company. He had no known connection to organized crime, no history of violence, no obvious reason anyone would want him dead. The police called me in for a follow-up interview. They showed me photographs of Andrew and asked if he could have been the man I saw go over the railing. I said yes. The build and height seemed right, though I could not be certain. They asked me again about the other man, the one who had pushed Andrew. I described him again, same as before. Tall, broad-shouldered, beard, baseball cap, dark clothing. They took notes, but I could tell they were skeptical. The medical examiner determined that Andrew had drowned. There were no other significant injuries, nothing to indicate he had been beaten or shot before entering the water. The fall itself had not killed him. The drowning had. The police ruled it an accidental death. Their theory was that Andrew had been on the bridge alone, possibly intoxicated or distraught, and had either jumped or fallen over the railing. When I protested, when I insisted there had been another person there, that I had witnessed a murder, they pointed to my own statement that I had been drinking, that it had been dark, that I had been far away. They suggested I might have seen Andrew struggle with the railing as he lost his balance, and my brain, influenced by alcohol and the shocking nature of what I was witnessing, had invented a second person to explain what I was seeing. It was a known psychological phenomenon, they explained, the mind filling in gaps to create a narrative that made sense. They thanked me for coming forward, for calling 911, but they were confident in their ruling. Accidental death. Case closed. I was furious. I knew what I had seen. There were 2 people on that bridge. One of them had killed Andrew, but without any physical evidence, without any witnesses besides me, without any clear motive or suspect. The police had decided the simplest explanation was that I had been mistaken. They moved on to other cases, and Andrew's death was filed away as a tragedy, but not a crime. I could not let it go. I started doing my own research, digging into Andrew's background, trying to figure out who might have wanted him dead. I learned that Andrew had been working on a major software project for his company, something involving data security for financial institutions. I learned that a few months before his death, he had reported concerns to his supervisor about irregularities in the code, possible backdoors that could be exploited. I learned that his company had contracts with several banks and investment firms in Portland, handling sensitive financial information. I also learned that 3 weeks before Andrew died, he had met with an FBI agent. I found this out through Andrew's girlfriend, who I tracked down and convinced to talk to me. She said Andrew had been nervous in the weeks leading up to his death, that he believed someone at his company was involved in illegal activity, possibly fraud or embezzlement. He had gone to the FBI with his concerns, provided them with documentation, and been told they would investigate. Then he had ended up in the Willamette River, and the police had ruled it an accident. I took all of this to the police. I begged them to reopen the investigation, to consider the possibility that Andrew had been killed because he was cooperating with federal investigators. They listened politely and told me that without concrete evidence linking Andrew's death to his work concerns, they could not justify reopening the case. The FBI, when I contacted them, confirmed that Andrew had met with an agent, but declined to provide any details about what he had reported, citing an ongoing investigation. That investigation apparently never went anywhere. Andrew's company underwent some internal restructuring a year later. Several high-level employees left, but no charges were ever filed. The whole thing was swept under the rug, and Andrew became a footnote, a guy who fell off a bridge one rainy night in Portland. I became obsessed. I spent months trying to identify the man I had seen on the bridge that night. I went through Andrew's social media, his LinkedIn connections, his co-workers, looking for anyone who matched the description. I found several possibilities: men who worked at the same company or had connections to the same industry, men who were the right height and build. But I could not be certain. The lighting had been poor, I had been drinking, and it had been years since that night. My memory of the man's face had become blurred, contaminated by all the photographs I had looked at since, all the speculation and theories I had developed. The police eventually asked me to stop calling. They told me, kindly but firmly, that I was harassing them, that the case was closed, that I needed to accept their findings and move on with my life. Andrew's girlfriend stopped returning my calls. She told me once, in our last conversation, that she appreciated what I was trying to do, but that dragging everything back up was too painful for her. She had accepted that Andrew was gone, and she needed to heal. But I cannot accept it. I know what I saw. Andrew was murdered on the Burnside Bridge in October 2005, put to his death by someone who wanted to silence him. That person walked away, disappeared into the night, and has never faced consequences for what they did. The system failed Andrew. The police failed him. And in some way, I failed him too by not acting faster, by not getting a better look at his killer, by not being a more credible witness. Andrew's case is officially closed, but it will never be closed for me. I still drive past the Burnside Bridge sometimes, and I always look at the spot where he went over the railing. I think about him struggling in that cold, dark water, knowing he was going to die, maybe wondering if anyone would ever know the truth about what happened to him. I know the truth, but knowing is not enough. Justice would require proof, and I do not have it. All I have is my memory of that night, the conviction that I witnessed a murder, and the guilt that comes from being unable to do anything about it. Andrew deserved better. He deserved an investigation that took seriously the possibility he had been killed. He deserved justice. Instead, he got a 3-paragraph obituary and a death certificate that says accidental drowning. That is the real crime. Not just that Andrew was murdered, but that no one in a position of power cared enough to find out who did it and why. 20 years have passed. The man I saw on the bridge that night is still out there somewhere, living his life, free and unpunished. And Andrew is still dead, his death officially unexplained, his story forgotten by everyone except me and the few people who loved him. This is what a cold case looks like. Not unsolved because the police lack resources or technology, but unsolved because sometimes the system decides certain deaths are not worth investigating. Sometimes a witness is not credible enough. Sometimes the truth is too inconvenient, and sometimes justice never comes. The Pacific Northwest is no stranger to storms. Every winter, massive weather systems roll in from the ocean, bringing winds that can knock down century-old trees and waves that reshape entire coastlines. People who live here learn to respect the power of these storms, to prepare for days without electricity, to understand that nature will always be stronger than anything humans can build. But the storm that hit the Washington coast in November 2010 was different. It was one of those once-in-a-generation events, the kind that meteorologists talk about for years afterward, the kind that changes landscapes and destroys communities. Natalie lived right in the path of that storm. I had known Natalie since college. We were not best friends, but we were close enough that we stayed in touch after graduation, met up for coffee every few months, exchanged holiday cards, that sort of thing. Natalie was a writer, a freelancer who wrote articles for travel magazines and environmental publications. She'd always been drawn to wild places, to the edges of things, and about 5 years before the storm, She had bought a small house on the Washington coast, right on the bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The house was beautiful in a stark, rugged way. It was old, built in the 1940s with weathered cedar siding and large windows that faced the water. Natalie loved it. She would send me photographs of sunsets over the ocean, of waves crashing against the rocks below her property, of the eagles and seals she would see from her deck. She said it was the perfect place to write, that the sound of the waves and the smell of salt air helped her focus in a way that nothing else ever had. But that house was also isolated. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away. The nearest town was 10 miles down a winding coastal road that was prone to landslides. In good weather, it was a beautiful, peaceful place to live. In bad weather, it could be terrifying. I spoke to Natalie on the phone the night before the storm hit. The weather reports had been dire for days, warning coastal residents to evacuate inland, predicting wind gusts over 100 miles per hour and waves that could reach 30 feet. I begged Natalie to leave, to come stay with me in Seattle until the storm passed. She laughed it off. She said the house had survived dozens of storms over the decades, that she had plenty of supplies, that she would be fine. I pushed harder, told her this was different, that even the National Weather Service was calling it potentially catastrophic. She got quieter then, and I could hear something in her voice that I had never heard before: fear. "There is someone outside," she said suddenly, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "What?" I asked, confused. "What do you mean, someone outside?" "I keep seeing someone," she said, "in the trees, near the edge of my property. I have seen them 3 times now over the past 2 days, just standing there, watching the house." My blood ran cold. "Natalie, you need to call the police right now." "I did," she said. "They came out yesterday and looked around. They did not find anyone. They said it was probably just a hiker, someone passing through. But I know what I saw. Someone is out there." I tried to convince her to leave immediately, to get in her car and drive to town, to not spend another night alone in that isolated house. She said the roads were already dangerous, that the wind was picking up, that she did not want to risk getting caught in the storm while driving. She promised she would lock all the doors and windows, that she would call me if anything else happened. I made her promise to check in with me first thing in the morning. That was the last conversation I ever had with Natalie. The storm hit around midnight. I watched the news coverage from my apartment in Seattle, horrified by the footage of coastal towns being battered by waves, trees being torn from the ground, buildings losing their roofs. The power went out across huge swaths of the coast. Communication lines went down. The roads were closed due to flooding and debris. It was complete chaos. I tried calling Natalie repeatedly throughout the night and the next morning. Every call went straight to voicemail. I told myself it was just the cell towers being down, that she was fine, that she was probably huddled in her house waiting for the storm to pass. But I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong, that her fear about someone watching her house had been justified. It took 3 days before the roads were cleared enough for emergency crews to reach the more remote coastal areas. I drove out as soon as I could, following the highway along the coast and seeing the devastation the storm had left behind. Entire sections of clifftop had collapsed into the sea. Houses had been reduced to piles of splintered wood. Boats had been lifted out of the water and deposited hundreds of yards inland. Natalie's house was still standing, but barely. The western side, the side facing the ocean, had been partially destroyed. The deck was gone entirely, ripped away by the wind or the waves. Several windows had been shattered, and rain and seawater had poured into the interior, ruining most of her belongings. The roof had held, but sections of the exterior walls had collapsed. It looked like a building that had been through a war, but Natalie was not there. I called the sheriff's department immediately. They sent deputies out within the hour. We searched the house together, calling Natalie's name, looking for any sign of where she might be. Her car was still in the driveway, covered in fallen branches but undamaged. Her purse was on the kitchen counter, her phone sitting next to it, dead battery. Her wallet was there, her identification, her credit cards, everything. But Natalie herself had vanished. The deputies organized a search of the surrounding area. Volunteers from the community joined in, forming lines and walking through the forest and along the beach, looking for any trace of Natalie. Search and rescue teams were brought in with dogs. They searched for 5 days straight, covering miles of coastline and forest. They found debris from the storm, pieces of destroyed buildings, dead wildlife, but no sign of Natalie. The official theory was that Natalie had been swept away by the storm. Perhaps she had gone outside during the height of the storm to secure something or check for damage, and the wind had knocked her off her feet, sent her tumbling down the cliff into the ocean below. Or perhaps a section of her house had collapsed while she was near the windows, and she had been pulled out by the wind. It was a plausible explanation. The storm had been violent enough to kill someone, and the ocean could easily have carried a body miles down the coast or pulled it out to sea where it would never be recovered. But there were things that did not make sense, things the authorities dismissed, but that haunted me. Natalie's shoes were still by the front door. Her rain jacket was still hanging on its hook. If she had gone outside during the storm, she would have put those on, unless she had gone out suddenly in a panic, responding to some immediate threat. And then there was the bedroom. Natalie's bedroom was on the eastern side of the house, the side that had survived the storm relatively intact. The door was closed, which was unusual. When the deputies opened it, they found the room in disarray, but not in the way the rest of the house was damaged. The destruction in the rest of the house was clearly from the storm, water damage and wind damage. But in the bedroom, drawers had been pulled open and rifled through. Clothes were scattered on the floor. The mattress had been partially pulled off the bed. It looked like someone had been searching for something. The deputies said the storm could have caused it, pressure changes, or wind coming through the broken windows elsewhere in the house. But I had been in that bedroom many times. I knew how Natalie kept it organized and neat, and the damage did not look like it had come from natural forces. It looked like someone had torn through her belongings, looking for something specific. I told the police about the phone call, about Natalie saying someone had been watching her house in the days before the storm. I begged them to consider the possibility that she had not been killed by the storm, but by whoever had been lurking on her property. They took my statement, but I could tell they did not take it seriously. The storm provided a simpler explanation, one that did not require investigating a potential crime. Natalie had been killed by the storm and her body had been lost to the ocean. Case closed. But I could not accept that. I hired a private investigator, a former cop who specialized in missing persons cases. He went through Natalie's house more carefully than the police had, looking for anything that might have been missed. He found something. In the pocket of a jacket hanging in Natalie's closet, he found a note. It was handwritten on a scrap of paper, just a few words. "Leave now, or you will regret it." The note hadn't been there when Natalie moved into the house. I was certain of that. Someone had left it for her recently, probably within the days before the storm. It was a threat, and it suggested that whoever had been watching her house had been planning something. The investigator tried to get the police to reopen the case, to treat Natalie's disappearance as a potential abduction or murder rather than a storm-related accident. But without a body, without witnesses, without any evidence of who might have left the note or why, there was nothing to investigate. The case remained classified as a presumed death due to natural disaster. I have spent the last 15 years trying to figure out what happened to Natalie. I have researched property disputes, wondering if someone had wanted her land and been willing to kill for it. I have looked into her work, wondering if she had been investigating something that made her a target. I have tracked down her neighbors, asked them if they had seen anything suspicious in the days before the storm. I have found nothing conclusive, but I have found theories. Natalie had been working on an article about illegal logging on state land. about companies cutting down protected old-growth trees and bribing officials to look the other way. She had mentioned it to me a few times, said she was close to having enough evidence to publish, but her notes on that story were never found. Her computer was recovered from the wreckage of her house, but the hard drive had been damaged beyond recovery, destroyed by water and exposure. Convenient, the investigator said. Too convenient. I believe someone came to Natalie's house the night of the storm. I believe they came while the winds were howling and the rain was pounding, knowing that no one would hear her scream, knowing that any evidence would be destroyed by the storm. I believe they took Natalie, either killed her there and disposed of her body in the ocean, or took her somewhere else. And I believe they used the storm as cover, knowing that everyone would assume she had been another victim of the natural disaster. Natalie has been legally declared dead. Her estate was settled, her belongings distributed to family members. The remains of her house were eventually demolished, the land sold to someone else who built a new structure on the site. Life moved on, but for me, the questions never stopped. The Pacific Northwest coast is littered with memorials to people lost to storms, to fishermen who never came home, to hikers swept away by rogue waves, to residents killed when their homes collapsed. Natalie is just one more name added to that long list of victims. But I do not believe she was killed by the storm. I believe she was murdered, and whoever did it got away with it because nature provided the perfect alibi. The official investigation is closed, but the truth is still out there, somewhere along that wild, storm-battered coast. And I will keep searching for it until I find it, or until the ocean claims me too. There are some memories from childhood that never fade, no matter how much time passes. The smell of your grandmother's cooking, the sound of your father's laughter, the face of your best friend. Joshua was my best friend from the time we were 5 years old until the summer we turned 18, and even now, more than 30 years later, I can remember everything about him. The way he would bite his lower lip when he was concentrating, the crooked smile he would get when he was trying not to laugh, the way his voice would go quiet when he was scared. I heard that quiet voice more times than I should have. We grew up in a small town in eastern Washington, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where families had lived for generations, where nothing much changed from one decade to the next. Joshua lived 3 houses down from me, and we were inseparable. We rode bikes together, built forts in the empty lots, played basketball in his driveway, spent countless hours just talking about our dreams and fears, and all the things we would do when we finally escaped that tiny town. Joshua's family seemed perfect from the outside. His father worked for the county as some kind of administrator. His mother was a substitute teacher and volunteered at the church. They lived in a nice house with a well-maintained yard. They went to all the school events, all the community gatherings. They smiled and waved and seemed like the model family. But I knew better. I knew because Joshua told me things he never told anyone else. I knew because I saw the bruises he tried to hide. I knew because I heard the fear in his voice when he talked about his father. The abuse started when Joshua was young, maybe 7 or 8. His father had a temper, Joshua said, and when he got angry, which was often, he would lash out. At first it was just verbal, screaming and degrading comments, telling Joshua he was worthless, stupid, that he would never amount to anything. Then it became physical. A slap across the face, a punch to the stomach, being shoved against walls, thrown downstairs, locked in the basement for hours as punishment for minor infractions. His mother knew. She had to have known. But she never did anything to stop it. She made excuses, told Joshua that his father was just stressed from work, that if Joshua would just try harder to be good, his father would not get so angry. She became complicit in the abuse through her silence. I wanted to tell someone. I begged Joshua to let me tell my parents, to let me go to the school counselor, to let me call the police. He always refused. He said it would only make things worse, that his father would hurt him even more if anyone found out, that his mother would deny everything, and he would be left alone with no protection at all. So I kept his secret, and I hated myself for it. When we were 14, Joshua's mother disappeared. It happened in the middle of July during the hottest part of summer. One day, she was there, and the next day she was gone. Joshua and his father told everyone the same story. She had left. She was unhappy in the marriage, unhappy in the small town, and she had packed a bag and driven away to start a new life somewhere else. She had not left a note. She had not said goodbye to Joshua. She had just left. The story never sat right with me. I had known Joshua's mother since I was a child. She was quiet, timid, almost invisible in her own home, but she loved Joshua. I had seen it in the way she looked at him, the way she would slip him extra cookies when his father was not looking, the way she would check on him after his father had been particularly cruel. Whatever else she was, whatever her failures as a mother, she loved her son. And I could not believe she would abandon him. I asked Joshua what had really happened. We were sitting in the fort we had built in the woods behind my house, the place where we always went to escape, to talk about things we could not say anywhere else. He was quiet for a long time, staring at the ground, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "She tried to leave," he said. "She told my father she was taking me and leaving, that she could not do it anymore, could not watch him hurt me anymore. They fought. I heard them yelling, and then everything went quiet." "What do you mean quiet?" I asked, though I already knew. I could feel the truth of it settling in my stomach like a stone. "I think he killed her," Joshua said. He was crying now, tears running down his face. "I think he killed her, and I do not know what he did with her body." I wanted to go to the police right then. I wanted to tell them everything, to demand they search Joshua's house, to make them arrest his father. But Joshua grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in so hard they left bruises, and he made me promise not to say anything. He said if I told, his father would kill him too. He said he just needed to survive 3 more years until he turned 18, and then he would leave and never come back. He begged me to keep his secret, and I did. God help me, I did. The police did eventually investigate Joshua's mother's disappearance, but it was perfunctory at best. They interviewed Joshua and his father, took statements, and moved on. There was no evidence of foul play. She had taken some of her clothes, her purse, her car. Her car was found a week later, abandoned at a bus station in Spokane. The theory was that she had driven there, taken a bus to somewhere else, and started over. It was sad, they said, that she had abandoned her family, but it was not a crime. Adults had the right to disappear if they wanted to. Joshua's father remarried within 2 years. A woman he had met at work, someone younger and more compliant than Joshua's mother had ever been. The abuse continued. Joshua wore long sleeves even in summer to hide the bruises. He became more withdrawn, stopped talking about his plans for the future, stopped dreaming. He was just surviving, counting down the days until he could escape. When we graduated high school, Joshua packed everything he owned into a duffel bag, bought a bus ticket to Seattle, and left. He did not say goodbye to his father. He did not attend graduation. He just left. And for the next 25 years, I did not hear from him. I tried to find him a few times, searched for him online, asked mutual friends if they had heard anything. No one knew where he was or what he was doing. It was like he had disappeared as completely as his mother had. Then, in the summer of 2019, I got a call from a detective with the county sheriff's department. They were investigating a discovery made during a renovation of Joshua's childhood home. The current owners had been doing work on the crawl space beneath the house when they found something. Human remains, partially skeletonized, wrapped in plastic sheeting and buried under the dirt floor. The remains were sent to the state forensics lab. DNA testing confirmed what Joshua and I had known for 25 years. It was his mother. She had never left town. She had never started a new life. She had been murdered and buried beneath her own house. And for decades, Joshua's father had been living directly above her body. Joshua's father was arrested within days. He denied everything at first, claimed he had no idea how his ex-wife's body had ended up in the crawlspace, suggested that maybe she had been killed by someone else and her body dumped there without his knowledge. But the evidence was overwhelming. Forensic analysis showed that she had been killed by blunt force trauma to the head, that she had been wrapped and buried shortly after death, that the burial had occurred during the time period when Joshua's father had exclusive access to the house. The trial was held the following year. I attended every day, sitting in the back of the courtroom, watching as the prosecution built their case piece by piece, and then Joshua took the stand. I had not seen him in person in over 2 decades, and the years had not been kind to him. He looked older than his age, worn down, haunted. But when he spoke, when he told the court about the abuse, about the night his mother had tried to leave, about the sounds he had heard, and the fear he had lived with ever since, his voice was steady and clear. He testified that he had heard his parents arguing the night his mother disappeared. He had heard his father shouting, heard his mother crying, and then heard a heavy thud followed by silence. He had stayed in his room, terrified, too scared to come out. In the morning, his father had told him that his mother had left, that she was not coming back, and that if Joshua ever told anyone what he had heard, the same thing would happen to him. Joshua had lived with that threat for 25 years. He had left town the moment he could, changed his name, built a new life far away from Washington, and tried to forget, but the trauma never left him. He had suffered from depression, anxiety, PTSD. He had struggled to maintain relationships, to hold down jobs, to feel safe in the world. The abuse had stolen his childhood, and his mother's murder had stolen any chance he had at a normal life. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Joshua's father guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. He will die there. He is 73 years old now, and he will never be free again. After the trial, Joshua and I met for coffee. It was awkward at first. We had not spoken in so long, had lived such different lives. But some friendships have roots that go too deep to ever fully die. We talked for hours, about the past, about what had happened, about the guilt we both carried. I apologized for not doing more when we were kids, for not telling someone about the abuse, for keeping his secret when I should have fought harder to get him help. He told me it was not my fault, that I had been a child too, that I had been the only person who had tried to help him at all. He thanked me for being there, for being his friend when he had needed one most. We stay in touch now. Not often, but enough. Joshua is slowly rebuilding his life. He is in therapy, working through the trauma, trying to find some kind of peace. He told me recently that testifying at the trial, finally telling the truth about what his father had done, had been the first step toward healing. For so many years, he had carried the weight of that secret alone. Now, finally, other people knew. His mother's death had been acknowledged. Justice, delayed by decades, had finally been served. But justice does not undo the damage. It does not give Joshua back his childhood or his mother. It does not erase the years of abuse or the decades of fear. It is something, but it's not enough. This story does not have a happy ending. It has an ending where the guilty party was punished, where the truth finally came to light, but that is not the same thing as happiness. Joshua lost his mother when he was 14. He lost his childhood, his sense of safety, his ability to trust. And in some ways, I lost my best friend, because the boy I grew up with never really came back. The man he became is a survivor, but he is also someone who carries scars that will never fully heal. The Pacific Northwest, with its small towns and close-knit communities, is often portrayed as idyllic, but behind the friendly facades and the well-maintained lawns, there are secrets, families, where violence is hidden behind closed doors, children who suffer in silence because they are too scared to speak up, systems that fail to protect the vulnerable because it is easier to believe that everything is fine. Joshua's story is a reminder that sometimes the real horror is not in the wilderness or in random acts of violence by strangers. Sometimes the real horror is in our own homes, perpetrated by the people who are supposed to love and protect us. And sometimes that horror goes unpunished for decades, hidden by silence and complicity, until chance or courage finally brings it to light. If you are reading this and you know a child who is being abused, please say something. Please do not keep their secret. Please do not wait for them to turn 18 and escape on their own, because some of them will not make it that long, and even the ones who do will carry the scars forever. Joshua survived, but he should never have had to.